I think we
I
all
think you
know how
all
the story
know
ends.
that.
All of America's top
Dude,
federal
Epstein's
authorities.
just got hella aura.
I'll watch this.
You
I'll
have
give
to
it a shot.
admit it.
Conspiracy. There was no client list, no blackmail, nothing
You
left
have
behind.
to. It doesn't matter.
The
It
banker
doesn't
spent
say
his
anything
career
about
building mysterious fortunes and managed money for billionaire clients.
moral practice,
What?
right? But he's got
That
hella
probably
aura
didn't
though.
exist, while also trafficking girls to and from a private island in the Caribbean at the same time as he hosted
A
some
private
of the world's
island?
politicians, businessmen,
You don't
intellectuals, and
just
celebrities
get
as
that,
house
dude.
guests.
You
He
know,
had
other
acted
rapists, they
completely alone.
rape
It was all an unfortunate coincidence
their own
and
family
nothing
and
more.
like their own
The
kids and
story of
shit,
Jeffrey
or they
Epstein
like
faded
capture
into the
people
past
from.
as the world
This guy's got a whole operation
Are you
going.
still talking
He
about Jeffrey
he doesn't just
Epstein?
capture kids.
Or at
He
least
pays
that's
people
what
to
the
capture
story
kids
would
for
have
him and then
been
hide
if
it
there weren't already
by
mountains
blackmailing
of
and
evidence
killing
of
everyone
Epstein being not
that
just a
dares say
psychopath,
anything
but
about it.
also at the center
That's
of
aura.
murdering
Just
that
look at the
all
look in his
world's
eyes.
most
He
powerful
looks like
people, procuring
Satan.
victims for
He
them
did.
to abuse together. Even now, with the federal government conflicting themselves
He's a
and
little
going
bit
back on
dramatized,
the word in regard to
Hold on,
his
I'll
case,
pause
the controversy
it
and
real
mystery
quick.
around Jeffrey Epstein has reached a fever pitch. Silence doesn't make it go away. It's only made the questions grow louder as people's trust in our leadership
No,
is
dramatized. I mean, guys, the TikTok clock, the music, the eeriness, the editing. Yeah, it's dramatized. I mean, what? I mean, what the fuck, you guys? What?
turning to dust.
He's right.
But in order to understand how Jeffrey Epstein was
It is
allowed to
true,
happen,
just-
what made him the
if you
monster
put-
he was, we have to go
If
all
you
the way back to
put
the beginning,
sad
before the
music
island,
when you
before the
discuss
fortress,
something
before
over
he was
you
king.
discussing
We have to
something
take a much
sad,
closer look at
it
his
is dramatized.
life and
If
the
you just
system
talk about
that
it
enabled him.
in like most critical,
Jeffrey
then it's
Epstein
not,
first
not always
appears in
dramatized.
any
Well,
public
he
capacity in July
he
of
is like a
1980 when
fucking
he's 27
comedy,
years
yeah.
old. But the context is very strange.
Who is this guy?
There's an article I
It's all
found from
dramatized.
Cosmopolitan magazine
Most
where he
YouTube
was
videos
listed
are.
as Bachelor of
Not
the
mine,
Month,
though.
with a tiny blurb
Mine
and a
are
black and
straight
white photo
facts.
next to it. It says, financial strategist Jeffrey Epstein talks only to people who make over $1 million a year. If you're a cute Texas girl, write this New York dynamo at 55 Water Street, 49th floor, New York, blah, blah, blah. Because for the first 20 years of his career, Epstein garnered only occasional and brief mentions in the press. He had no real public recognition at all in the way that most high-level bankers might. And that's because there wasn't really a sensible explanation as to how he got there in the first place. Jeffrey Edward Epstein, born in Brooklyn in 1953, was the son of two working-class Jewish parents who, by all accounts, were completely
Yo, what's on his head? Like,
It's like a goofy ass
His mother,
haircut.
Pauline, worked a
my
full-time
God.
job as a teacher's assistant while raising the kids, and his
Chat,
father worked for the City of New York's Parks Department as a
most of
gardener.
the
Former
fashion
friends
and
neighbors
haircuts
would
of the
use
latter
words
half
like
of the
simple,
20th
humble, and gentle
century
when talking about Epstein's
were
parents,
fucking dog
his
shit.
brothers,
They were
and even
fucking
Jeffrey
trash. They were
himself.
absolute
One former
trash.
neighbor would later write that he was a nerdy little boy. People said that he was smart, overweight, always smiling, but mostly quiet. In high school, Epstein liked algebra and calculus, and he was on the math team. But his teammates would later describe him as not sticking out all that much. But he was smart enough to graduate high school in 1969, 2 years early, and he would then attend Cooper Union College, a very small school in Manhattan known for offering completely free tuition. He studied math there, although after 2 years he transferred to NYU, but he ended up leaving there after 3 years without any college degree at all. But within 2 months, Epstein had picked up a full-time job anyway. He'd become a high school math teacher, not just at any school, but at one of the most prestigious in Manhattan, a school for the children of the elites. The students were the children of highly paid bankers, developers, politicians, people that could afford to pay a tuition equal to $50,000 a year today. By the time he started teaching at Dalton, Epstein was almost a completely different person. Basically, as a teacher, Jeffrey Epstein was a sleazy scumbag and a bit of a disaster. In the mid-1970s, students at one of New York's most esteemed prep schools were surprised to encounter a new teacher who pushed the limits of the school's strict dress code, wandering the halls in a fur coat, gold chains, and an open shirt that exposed his chest. But it wasn't just a willingness to dress provocatively, it was how he interacted with students that left an impression on many of them for decades after. He was apparently popular among female students, as many young teachers might be, but the problem was that he not only embraced the attention, but also seemed to have chased after it. The story goes that at one point, he even started showing up at students' parties, including ones where they would have been drinking underage. But before this private school teacher in his mid-20s could ever get involved in something that might implicate him in a serious way, Epstein was fired from the Dalton School for performance issues. He simply wasn't a good teacher. But at the same time, though, he was able to move his career
if
in
you're
a
not a
way
good
that I
teacher,
could only
it
describe as
matters.
failing upwards.
You are not good at
Because
math,
if you
yeah.
fast forward about 20 years, Epstein was no longer this sort of aimless college dropout who had a reputation for being a bit of a creep towards students at the school he worked at. It was almost as if Epstein would go on to become a completely literally different person. When you look deeper at how exactly Epstein goes from this disgraced schoolteacher to flying a jetliner around the world while he rubs elbows with the rich and famous, the puzzle pieces don't really fit together. It would only be a few months after getting fired from the Dalton School in 1976 until Epstein found another job. Specifically, he got hired at the giant investment firm Bear Stearns as an assistant to a floor trader. And it's the second time he did that in just a couple of years. Because if he did do one thing right while working at Dalton, it was impress his students' rich and powerful parents.
Specifically, he was hired off the recommendation of a student's parent he had impressed who also happened to be friends with Alan Greenberg, CEO of the bajillion-dollar Bear Stearns investment bank. Greenberg was also known for coming from a working-class background, and he liked to hire people with what he called PSD degrees: poor, smart, and desperate to be rich. Whether or not getting his foot in the door was his original goal while working at a private school, whatever it was, Epstein had launched himself up the ladder in a massive way.
And it's kind of weird, but Epstein's time at this giant financial services firm, it wasn't all that different from his time as a teacher. Within just 4 years there, he gets promoted from junior assistant to limited partner, which is a pretty crazy trajectory for someone with no college degree. But then, just a year after that, he was actually asked to quit or be fired during an SEC investigation into insider trading at Bear Stearns. But for the rest of the 1980s, he would start or get involved in a strange series of businesses that, if we didn't know they existed, kind of sound made up. Probably the strangest out of everything he did during this time was Towers Financial Corporation, a collection agency that was in the business of buying consumer medical debt. While he was hired as a consultant and paid the equivalent of $69,000 a month today, the first job he was given was to start using the company as a raiding vessel for corporate takeovers. In the 80s, there was this popular practice of buying a large stake in a corporation, then firing top executives, and then downsizing even further to increase the share value before selling. Basically, you take over and ruin a company just to make money from it. And their first move was to attempt a takeover of a kind of old, declining airline, Pan American World Airways, in 1987. A year later, they also tried to take over Emory Air Freight. And while both attempts failed, that wasn't the problem. The problem is that they were using money they didn't actually have. Basically, while this company was claiming to be a debt collection agency, they had also raised $500 million from investors while promising big returns. They used the money on private jets, fancy houses, expensive cars, and their plan for paying it all back was to attempt those crazy corporate takeovers that were supposed to make enough profit to cover everything. But then when the takeovers failed, they had nowhere to turn, no money to repay the investors, and it all fell apart. And so in 1993, Towers Financial would implode after being exposed as one of the biggest Ponzi schemes in American history. But when it came time for his former business partner, Stephen Hoffenberg, to be deposed and tell his side of the story in court, he didn't just throw Epstein under the bus, he basically blamed the whole thing on him. But by the time the company collapsed and was being investigated, Epstein had already been gone for 3 years. He would never be charged with anything related to Towers Financial. Meanwhile, his business partner Hoffenberg, he would spend nearly 20 years in prison. I don't think we have an exact reason why Epstein was never charged for being on the inside of one of the biggest Ponzi schemes ever. One explanation is that Hoffenberg could have been lying. His testimony during his case was considered kind of generally unreliable. He would lie about a lot of stuff. Another reason is that Epstein was never really on the record as being deeply involved in the fraud because apparently they didn't use his name for the trades or whatever it was. It's just hearsay. You know, we can't really prove that he's involved in the scam, so it's not worth pursuing if they did have Hoffenberg right in front of them and they could just punish him. However, another person would later write that it was only because of lazy prosecution that Epstein walked away and that he was definitely involved as far as anyone can tell. Especially because it's well recorded that during the peak of the Towers Financial scam, Epstein was physically accompanying Hoffenberg around the world on his jet. He was meeting with investors. He was with him a lot of the time. And that's because somehow, after walking away from a moderately high-paying consultant job and apparently having nothing to do with the hundreds of millions of dirty money they made, he somehow pops up again a couple years later, completely reinvented, like his old self never existed at all.
Hey, what's that?
Never existed at all. But the idea that Epstein's career is just kind of a story about failing upwards, like I mentioned earlier, that doesn't even really explain how he ends up where he did. Yeah, a teacher at a rich private school might get hired by one of his students' rich parents, okay? But 15 years later, walking away unscathed from one of the worst financial crimes in American history. I mean, seriously, most of us probably don't remember, but Towers Financial was absolutely horrible. Even back at that point in his life, a lot of his situations sound like a conspiracy. But of course, that's only one of these really odd stories that have been told about Epstein's careers over the years that imply all these different truths about how he ended up where he did. Multiple people over the years, journalists, friends, business partners, they all recalled Epstein suggesting or hinting that he worked for an intelligence agency, although he never specified which one. But in the mid to late 80s, during the same time he was working at Towers Financial, he also worked with Adnan Khashoggi, the Saudi businessman with ties to the CIA and Mossad, who was best known for being the middleman in transferring American weapons from Israel to Iran during the Iran-Contra affair. Add on to that the fact that Epstein was later found to have a fake Austrian passport with multiple stamps from the Middle East, it only further paints a very confusing picture about Epstein's career. There just isn't a normal, sensible conclusion to this part of Epstein's life. Even after connecting all the dots, it still
Austria
doesn't make
or
sense.
Switzerland.
He starts off by dropping out of college without getting his degree, only to get hired at a prestigious school.
But nobody's talking about anything though. Chat. How many people were exposed to this information? Or information? I mean, hundreds, no? Why is nobody saying anything?
That he then gets fired from for being a bad teacher, only to then get hired at a hugely prestigious investment firm that he also then gets fired from.
It's not called defending. It's called attacking. It's the opposite. At this point, I am attacking everybody that knows something that isn't saying even a single thing about anything. It's busted as shit.
Yeah.
Yo, you would expect some people to be close to at least old age. I mean, some of these people are gonna die. Like they're old. And then leave the world with some form of letter of revealing some shit. How come nobody says anything at all? We're talking about thousands of
I think they probably
thousands
will.
of people.
There are people coming out about it, but it's getting silenced
insane.
as
Like,
well.
somebody says
Only to
something.
then
Like,
end up getting implicated in one of the
What I
biggest
didn't
Ponzi
talk
schemes in
earlier is
American
because
history that he somehow
they
never
have
faces
like
a
nothing to
single charge
gain
for
and
being
everything to
involved
lose.
in.
These people
Along
don't
the way,
give a
he
fuck
gets
about
fake passports, he does business
catching
with
a guy,
arms dealers
because
in the Middle
if
East,
anything,
and at the end of all of it,
keeping
he's
Epstein on the
filthy rich.
streets
At every
helps
single
them in every
turn,
way.
you see him get not punished, but
God, they
actually
lied.
rewarded.
They didn't
for
say
stealing,
anything because they
cheating,
liked
and lying.
the demonic
craziest part of
rituals
all
and
of
the
that
raping kids.
is
They
that
loved
was
that.
just the beginning.
They wanted that.
In the late 80s,
They just
Epstein
have to say
forms
they
a new
don't
company,
now
Epstein
because the
& Co.,
public will
a
get
wealth
mad at
management firm where he establishes immediately that he's not going to take any clients with a net worth of under $1 billion.
It was around the time that Epstein launched Epstein & Co., his investment services company, that his life kind of just seems to completely change all over again for what feels like the 100th time in a row. By the early 90s, he's moving like someone who's in charge of an empire. He's flying around the world in a giant jetliner, he's acquiring massive properties around the US, but at the same time, his name never shows up in Forbes. He has no public filings, no client list, no office, but to the people around him, it looks like he owns the world. By the late 90s, Epstein's doing what I could only describe as flying too close to the sun. He's friends with Donald Trump, the Prince of England, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. He even buys a literal island where he would build an extravagant compound for hosting parties. But after a series of conspicuous stunts, one of which
I'm guessing he
he
made
bought
himself
from
valuable
Denmark.
to powerful people.
Fucking Denmark.
And gained a lot of their trust and a lot of their some form of admiration, and got on their better end, and then got mega ultra bonuses for this shit.
was a trip to Africa.
He seems like a.
That's the part you don't say. Fucking Denmark.
Not just blackmail,
It gets to
though.
a point where Epstein is too big.
I wouldn't judge that by only that
the general
blackmail.
public, people are wondering how Epstein made all this money, where he came from, what's the point of everything he does. How he got to this level of social status is yet another strange story in this never-ending list of strange stories.
Blackmail, guys.
And a big part of it would be
In a big scheme like this, blackmail will be the last straw, right? Once you pull blackmail on one person, on a few people, you're cooked. You lose the trust of everybody. You lose your entire cover to whatever
True.
you worked on.
That's what
loses.
these scams
That'll be his last play.
that's what he lost.
Before this, look at
But
some
he
of the
just-
footage. People
It's
enjoy
like
being
you do
around them.
one
You know,
bad
people were
thing
smiling
and you
and
lie
shit,
about
fucking
it,
whatever.
but
Like,
and you cover up the
clearly,
lie by
they were
lying
fond of
about
this
another
person.
thing,
Like,
and you lie about another
is
thing to
very
cover that
rich.
one up.
I'm
You
saying
keep
he's
lying
always
and
on
lying
the
and
other
lying.
side.
Eventually, if you lie to so many people, you've lied to more people you know than people that actually trust you.
That's
So
part of
they're
it.
just gonna clap
He
you
was
hard.
a media
Scheme.
tycoon businessman with a really strange life. After the war, he
That's
changes
what
his name
happened.
to Robert
He just got
Maxwell,
clapped because
moves to
he
England,
lied too
and
much.
gets
It's
elected
always
into
if
the
you
British
if you
Parliament. But
behave
he
in
also
bad
quickly
ways,
starts building a media.
it's like quick gains versus long-term gains. Good people get long-term gains and they win in the end. Bad people win now and they lose and they keep losing afterwards. Right, that's what
empire
happened to
across
Epstein.
Europe at the same time. Over a period of around
That's why
50
bad
years,
people
he ends up
can't
owning
build
the Daily
countries,
Mirror.
they can't
He owns
build
part of
societies
MTV
because
in Europe,
their
the London
societies
Daily
don't
News.
last.
At one point, he even buys the US-based Macmillan Publishers for over $2 billion in the late 80s. But throughout his life, he was also closely linked to Israeli intelligence. Point being, though, is that one of Robert Maxwell's 9 children, Ghislaine, had long been a prominent socialite in London and New York. And after her father died and the family empire collapses in the early 90s, she ends up living in Manhattan, where she would end up dating none other than Jeffrey Epstein. Notably, Ghislaine, the daughter of this internationally known billionaire spy for Israel, would become the primary link between Epstein and his powerful social network. Out of many things she would do for him, she would be the person who introduces him to Prince Andrew, Saudi royals, celebrities, politicians. Of course, Epstein was already pretty well connected, but his relationship with Maxwell was pivotal in him inserting himself into the upper echelon of society.
In March of 2003, Vanity Fair journalist Vicky Ward
is
sets out to
classic.
write a profile
You,
about Jeffrey Epstein
you
and
get a
figure
guy,
out what exactly
you get a guy
he's
that can be a pawn. I use a women to control him. Chad, it's so easy. If you just indoctrinate the women and then use the women to control the guys, you max win.
all about.
That's how
once
you.
and for
That's
all.
how you really scheme
Lately,
things.
Jeffrey Epstein's high-flying style has been drawing oohs and ahs.
Chad,
The bachelor
Epstein
financier
lost
lives
because he's
in
a
New York's
gooner.
largest private residence.
He didn't
claims to
lost
only
because
take
he
billionaires
rapes
as
kids.
clients,
He lost
and
because
flies
he's a
celebrities
massive
like Bill
gooner.
Clinton
So
and Kevin
been doing
Spacey
it.
on his
He's
Boeing
desperate, Chad.
727.
I bet he got
But
cut.
Pierce's air of mystery, and the
He got-
picture changes.
He got
and
cut.
The point was that after peeling back his mask of
Yeah, and he
mystery,
couldn't stand it, so he just
something
started
far
raping
more
kids.
alarming than anticipated would be
That's what they all do.
revealed.
Her
research led her to question
have you
the
watched
idea
Cops
that
Love
Epstein
videos?
made all of his money
Chad,
with an
all the
exclusive and
cucks
private
always end up
investment
being
firm
killers.
where he'd only
Every
take
single
on
time. They
billionaires
always
as
end up being
clients.
killers because they
She
can't
suggests
cope.
that Leslie
They
Wexner
cope
is
too
the
much,
only
and then
client
it comes to a
Epstein
point where
ever had, but
they just
even more
blow
than
up.
that,
Right?
that his
And he
business
just starts
isn't
killing
really how
people
he
for no
made his
reason
money
because
at
they're
all.
cucks.
What she
It's like
found
the cuck,
made it look like Epstein really wasn't
bald,
a genius investor at all,
masculine
but
rage.
probably acquired
Like,
the majority
that-
of his
that- that's what it
mysterious
is.
fortune from the tower's financial Ponzi scheme, which he was far more involved in than the official story would suggest. She essentially made him look like a fraud, a con man with no substantial investing
I
history,
thought that only gave him a
hiding
few
behind the
$100 million,
persona
though.
of an elite financial mastermind, while building up a social network to make him look a lot more sophisticated than he really was. It's even worse than what they did publish about him is what they didn't.
That's it. It's just, it ends like this.
That's it then.
I'm not a fan of the editing of this video. It goes up and down and goes into slabs and stop, boom, different type of vibe. Boom. It's very odd.
It's just not. It just doesn't go deep enough.
Anybody agrees with that?
Chad, I don't like when they do part 2. It's just go hard, all like full in one time, and then you
Plus.
get all of it.
Yeah, it's kind of odd.
Otherwise, it's
I'll link
annoying.
you the video. Sure, I got you, bro.
Just annoying.